Let me introduce to you Congressman Michael Fitzpatrick and David Walker, the Honorable David Walker.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sir. Thank you. Thank you. Let me say a few words about our guests. The Honorable David M. Walker is the founder and CEO of Comeback America Initiative. David is the founder and CEO of that, in addition to the initiative we're talking about today. In this capacity, he leads the CAI's efforts to promote fiscal responsibility and sustainability by engaging the public and assessing key policymakers on a nonpartisan basis to help achieve solutions to America's federal, state, and local fiscal imbalances. Prior to assuming his current position, he served as the first president and CEO of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. Previously, Dave served as the 7th Comptroller General of the United States and head of the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO, for almost 10 years. And those years were 1998 to 2008. This was one of Dave's 3 presidential appointments, each by different presidents during his 15 years, I should add, by both the Democratic and Republican presidents, and total federal service. Dave has over 20 years of private sector experience, including approximately 10 years as a partner and global managing director of human capital services for Arthur Andersen. In addition to his leadership responsibilities, Dave currently serves on various nonprofit boards and advisory groups. He is also a member of the Accounting Hall of Fame. I didn't know there was one. It's pretty exciting. The Trilateral Commission, and the Sons of the American Revolution. Dave has won numerous leadership awards both domestically and internationally. He also has authored 3 books, with the latest one titled Comeback America, Turning the Country Around and Restoring Fiscal Responsibility. And that was published in 2010. It is a national bestseller. He is a frequent writer and media commentator and is the subject of the critically acclaimed documentary IOUSA. And that is David Walker. Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick, of course, is a lifelong resident of Bucks County and served as the Bucks County Commissioner for 10 years before being elected to Congress. He represents Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District, which includes all of Bucks County and portions of Montgomery County. Mr. Fitzpatrick is a graduate of St. Thomas University and holds a law degree from Penn State's Dickinson School of Law. In Congress, Representative Fitzpatrick is a strong advocate for government reform, small business and manufacturing, and enacting legislation that works for Bucks and Montgomery counties. He serves on the House Financial Services Committee and is an active member of the bipartisan group called No Labels. Mr. Fitzpatrick is married with 6 children and lives in Levittown. So with that, this program is going to run until approximately 11:15, and we're going to begin by turning it over to Mr. Walker.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thanks all of you for coming out on a Saturday morning. What I'm going to do is try to provide you with an overview of a new initiative, legislative initiative called Make Government Work, which was the idea of no labels, but has been embraced and being championed by Congressman Fitzpatrick and about 80-plus members of Congress on a bipartisan basis. First, no labels. No labels is for Republicans, Democrats, independents, be whatever you want, and for the record, I'm an independent, who believe in progress over partisanship and results over rhetoric, at working together to try to get things done. The problem solvers represent, and here's a picture of an event that was on July 18th in Washington, where we had about 70 of the 80-plus problem solvers, including Congressman Fitzpatrick, who have come together to try to work together on legislative initiatives that are for the benefit of the country and the American people, and that will do so on a bipartisan basis. There are over 80 members. roughly equally distributed between Republican and Democrat, and there's one independent, Senator Angus King from Maine. And they have come up with an agenda called Make Government Work. And so I want to make you familiar with what's in the agenda so that you may have some questions on it. Let's go to the next slide if we can. First, no budget, no pay. All of these are about how do you make government work in a more economical, efficient, and effective manner. Different people have different opinions about what the size of government ought to be, what the role of government ought to be, what the level of taxation ought to be, etc. But we ought to be able to agree, no matter what you think on that, that whatever the government does, it ought to do it in an economical, efficient, and effective manner. With regard to no budget, no pay. Basically what it says, if Congress cannot pass a budget and its annual spending bills on time, they shouldn't get paid until they do. Let me give you a little context here. There's only one thing in the United States Constitution that Congress is supposed to do every year, and that's pass timely appropriations bills, which should be guided by a budget. I'm 61 years old. I know that's hard to believe, but I am. And they have only passed a timely budget and appropriations bills 4 times in 61 years. And guess what? It's going to be 4 times in 62 years real soon, because they're not going to pass one this time. Well, the bottom line is that's fundamental. The budget is your roadmap. It sets your priorities. We can't operate without a budget. We need timely appropriations bills in order to operate efficiently. And so this would say effective the next Congress, for constitutional reasons, effective in the next Congress, that if they don't pass both the budget and the appropriations bills on time, they won't get paid until they do, and they won't get retroactive pay. So it's not a delay of pay, it is a loss of pay. And the lead sponsors are noted down below on all these bills. You can read for yourself, but there are a number of other co-sponsors, and it's my understanding that Congressman Fitzpatrick has co-sponsored all 9 of these bills. Let's keep moving. The next one is take the time, save the dime. Please, next one. Basically, it says that, well, since we've only done timely budgets 4 times in 61 years, maybe we'll do better if we do budgets and appropriations bills every 2 years, which is what the states do. Most of the states pass 2-year budgets. You know, members of Congress get a 2-year term. You know, they spend a lot of time each year talking about the budget appropriations bills, but not much gets done. So the idea is adopt the best practice from most of the states, go to 2-year budgeting and appropriations, and then use the other year to actually do more oversight to find out what programs and policies are working and which ones aren't working. Next, please. The next one is don't duplicate, consolidate. I headed something called the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO. It's basically, I was the Auditor General, the Chief Accountability Officer of the United States. And they do audits, investigations, evaluations, you know, a legal analysis, et cetera. And in the last 2 years, they've issued 3 reports at the request of Senator Tom Coburn to be able to lay out duplication, overlap, and fragmentation of government programs, where you have, for example, multiple programs doing training, food safety, financial literacy, typically not coordinating with each other at all, duplicating efforts, sometimes doing things that are, frankly, directly polar opposite of what the other one is doing, if you will. So what this would do is it would say that the Office of Management and Budget must look at the open recommendations there and then make proposals to the Congress of what should be done to reduce the duplication and deal with the overlap, et cetera. Next, please. Buy smarter, save more. What this says is basically going to bulk purchasing. You know, many of us end up using BJ's or Costco or whatever else, and the federal government has something called the General Services Administration that provides a basis for people to be able to get a little bit better deal on government purchases for government agencies. But they don't require bulk buying. And so as a result, everybody's kind of on their own. And there's a lot of things that government buys in bulk, whether it's computers, whether it's stationery, I mean, just basic things that we could get a lot better deal if we did it on a bulk basis. And so this basically would require that the government start doing that. Next, please. No adding, no padding. Now, in Washington, they use words that don't mean the same things as Webster's dictionary. For example, cuts. Normally when Washington is talking about cuts, they're not talking about an absolute reduction. They're talking about reducing the rate of increase. And one of the reasons that they do that is because the way the budgets are prepared in Washington are not like they are in the real world, where you start off with what you spent last year, and if you want anything more than you spent last year, you got to justify it, whether it's for wage increases or inflation or special initiatives, whatever. You got to justify it, and you also have to show how you're trying to improve productivity, how you're trying to be able to get more for less. That's not how Washington does it. What Washington does, they start off with what they spent last year, and they automatically add inflation and a bunch of other indexing formulas. So basically what this says is, no, do it like 99% of enterprises in the world do. Start off with what you spent last year, justify anything that you want more than that, and try to focus more on productivity. Next, health care for heroes. Basically what this says is that the Defense Department and the Veterans Administration must work together to develop an integrated information system for health care for veterans. One of the things that the federal government does worse is integrated information systems. And here we're talking about people that have served their country, in many cases have been injured in serious ways. And what we need to do is not just to do this for economy and efficiency, but for the health and safety and well-being of our veterans. It is an outrage that they haven't done this yet. Next, please. Stay in place, cut the waste. Well, some of you have probably seen a few articles in recent times about government, government conferences in Hawaii, in Las Vegas, in Orlando, and various other places that cost lots of money. Well, basically what this says is come into the 21st century and start using video conferencing and webcasting like a vast majority of business enterprises do. Cut travel budgets 50%, replace it with video conferencing, webcasting, et cetera, in order to still have the communication and the interaction, but to reduce unnecessary costs. Next, please. Wasted energy, wasted dollars. You know, the government has a huge number of facilities all around the country, and it is a huge user of energy for cooling and heating and a variety of other things. And so basically what this does is this takes a concept that many private sector enterprises use, where there are companies out there that will do energy audits and efficiency audits, and they will take the risk. They will do it for free, but you have to pay them a percentage of the savings if they can achieve some savings. And so the idea is they've got skin in the game. If it turns out that they can achieve efficiency, then fine, they win, but more importantly, we win. And so you end up saving money, but also improving energy efficiency. Next, please. Plan for efficient, effective government. This is the last one, but by no means the least important. Arguably could be the most important. The federal government's organization and operations are based on the 1950s. Let me repeat that. Its organizational structure, its operational practices are by and large based upon conditions that existed in the world and in the United States in the 1950s. The layers of management, the number of organizations, et cetera. In addition, in 1990, when the GAO issued its first high-risk list, those are areas of high risk of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, there were 14 items on it. This year, there are 30 items on it. Furthermore, there are a number of areas of recommendations that the inspectors general and GAO and others will make to the executive branch, and about 85% of those are adopted, and they save a lot of money every year. But what they typically don't do is they don't make recommendations to the Congress that requires legislative action. What this would do is it would create an independent commission comprised of capable, credible players with proven experience in transforming organizations, either in the public sector, private sector, not-for-profit. They would look at the good work that's been done by GAO, the inspectors generals, and others. They would make specific recommendations that would be guaranteed hearings in Congress and guaranteed an up or down vote, yes or no. Similar to the Base Realignment and Closure Commission, the difference is that Congress could say yes or no. This could save hundreds of billions of dollars over 10 years. Because let me tell you, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. But the regular order in Congress is not working. Congress is not effectively addressing these. You can't expect the executive branch to necessarily be able to do all of these because the executive branch is part of an administration. The administration has a head called the president. The president belongs to a political party, and that tends to make things more difficult. So this would be some Democrats, Republicans, and independents with proven track records who would sort through all of this stuff, working with government employees and outside contractors, making recommendations with a large return on investment. That may be the last slide. Stop finding, start fixing. Okay, that's the theme. In other words, there's too much combative behavior going on. There's not enough communication going on. We have too much of a gridlock in Washington now. We need to start working together to solve problems. Look, we need to do a grand fiscal bargain that involves tax reform, social insurance reform, another round of health care reform, more intelligent defense and other spending cuts. We need to do all of that. And that may be a ways off. But the fact is that a lot of the commissions that have been out there, like Simpson-Bowles or Domenici-Rivlin or whatever, they haven't dealt with these fundamentals. The basics of organization and operations of government. Let's deal with those, let's make progress on those, and hopefully we'll end up dealing with the bigger issues soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Congressman Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Bill. First, I want to thank Professor Pez and the Bucks County Community College for hosting us this morning. A few moments ago, I was bragging to David Walker about our community, about Bucks County, the 8th Congressional District, about the Bucks County Community College specifically. This is a new facility. I think we have probably the best community college in Pennsylvania, if not the country. My background, when David and I were talking earlier, was as a county commissioner, where we are required to have a budget and pass the budget on time, and make sure the budget balances, and we've done all that. We have a AAA bond rating, credit rating in Bucks County. We've got a growing fund balance because when we pass our budgets in Bucks, we not only make sure they balance, but then you manage those budgets and you make sure that your revenues come in over budget and your expenditures come in under budget, and that's how you get a growing fund balance, which we had. And then when you want to build a facility like this facility that we're in right now, you run the numbers, you take a look. And the history of this place, David, is that this is the lower campus of the Bucks County Community College. The main campus is in Newtown, which is gorgeous. We built a brand new Upper County campus, but we were renting space right next door at a former high school. The old Delhouse High School was next door, and we took a look at the rent that we were paying, and we looked at the potential. You could see a downturn, slow down the economy coming, which meant more young kids would be going to community colleges rather than four-year, more expensive universities, and we saw an opportunity. But we made sure, the bottom line is we made sure that we could afford it. And so I am very proud to be able to, honored to be able to represent this community. I thought when I was county commissioner, we were passing those budgets and balancing those budgets, that other public officials throughout the country would be doing the same. And so imagine my surprise when I got to Washington and found out that, there was a $12 trillion debt, which became a $14 trillion debt, which is now $17 trillion. That they haven't had a balanced budget since the 1990s. And as David Walker said, that they haven't even had a budget for most years, except just a handful of years in the last 50 or so. David, I want to thank you for coming. I want to welcome you to Bucks County. Thank you for coming. I want to say something I don't want to embarrass David, but I met David Walker for the first time around 2007. With a friend of mine, Jeff Petty, who may be here today. He actually introduced me to David. And I met a lot of public finance and budgetary professionals and officials in government, both before then and after then. But I've never met somebody who is so smart, so sharp, and so honest about the fiscal condition of a government, specifically for David, the federal government, then David Walker. And when the No Labels organization was being constituted and created a couple of years ago, there were a lot of folks who were interested, who saw what was happening in Washington, were concerned about the direction of the country and the direction of Congress and wanted to fix it. And many of them were former members of Congress who had come to me saying, Mike, you know, you represent a district with a lot of common sense. You know, you have to balance the approach on budget and everything else as a representative of the 8th Congressional District. They wanted me to join this group, No Labels. And I was hesitant at first. I wanted to look into it. I wanted to find out what it was about. And when I saw that David Walker was one of the co-founders, that made the decision pretty easy for me. And I joined very early. Originally, there were about 24 of us, roughly half Democrat and half Republican. 24 became 48. And as of today, when we had our press conference on July 18th in front of the United States Capitol building, there were about 81 of us. And I know that there's some concern in the organization. I actually want to cap it out at about 100 because at some point in time, you become less effective. Now, when I went to Congress, and with that background, both in the private practice of my profession, representing small businesses, and also as a county official, in adopting budgets, I was always mainly concerned with where we're spending the money. You know, if you can take a look at the problems and reform systems that you could spend, you know, less or more effective or efficiently, maybe spend more, but even reach more people by being more efficient. My point is, I was always looking at where we were spending the money. And it became pretty obvious to me when I got to Washington and found out that the budgetary process was broken. It's not just where you spend the money, it's how you spend it. And that's what this package of bills really is about. I was an early proponent of no budget, no pay, because I thought that if the federal government, as David says, you know, the primary constitutional obligation of a member of Congress or the institution itself is to timely pass appropriations bills, and you're not doing that. You need to figure out why is that not happening? If you could penalize the very individuals that you hire to comply with the Constitution and adopt those budgets by not paying them, I thought, well, you'll get people's attention real quick. And when I got to Congress in 2011 and a budget resolution had not been adopted by Congress for several years, I know I was committed as a new member of Congress to make sure we adopted one in the House. And we did adopt one. We adopted one in 2011. We adopted one in 2012. In both years, the Senate was not able to get to a budget resolution. So as you know from civics, if the House and the Senate don't pass a resolution, you can't get it to the president's desk for signature. So essentially, we did not have a budget. And the Senate, in the beginning of 2013, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Senator Patty Murray from the state of Washington, I believe, announced in the early 2013 that she didn't believe the Senate would be able to adopt the budget this year either. And I had been promoting the no budget, no pay bill from No Labels for months already, trying to get the public's attention to it. And at that point in time, it started to pick up some steam. And ultimately, no budget, no pay was adopted around January or February of this year. Now, it was a watered-down version of the bill that I support, but it was a better bill than no bill at all. And lo and behold, as soon as the House passed the no budget, no pay bill, back in the beginning of this year, Senator Murray announced, you know what, we think we can adopt a budget resolution after all. I'm not sure if it was whether they were concerned they wouldn't get paid, but whatever the reason was, it was progress. So I'm going to continue to forward the ideas of this organization, because this organization is good on a whole bunch of different levels. I have co-sponsored every one of the 9 bills you saw before you, and to a certain extent, these are small steps toward a very big goal that we have to have in this country. Get a balanced budget, put the country's fiscal house in order so we can leave a better America for our children and grandchildren. That's what we're all about. I believe that's why you're here today. That's what our country has always been about. I just want to spend a couple of moments talking about my bill, and then we'll get to the questions that you have. So of the 9 bills, the one that I'm the original sponsor of, along with a Democrat from Georgia named John Barrow, the bill is called Stay in Place, Cut the Waste. And what that bill would do is, as David described it earlier, reduce government executive agency travel across the board in order to save your money from being wasted in those news reports that you've seen. We all remember the famous GAO, no, GSA, I'm sorry, David. It was a GSA.
One of those G's.
One of those acronyms. It was a GSA junket, I don't know how else to describe it, out to Las Vegas with the famous photograph of the individual in charge in the hot tub with the glass of sangria in front of him. And you know, the IRS has had their recent problems, and when there's a scandal inside an agency, there tends to be a greater, brighter white light that shines on that agency, and you begin to determine and figure out what's really going on and some of the waste that actually occurs. That's infuriating to me when I see it, because I know, you know, I work hard, and I know that you work very hard for the dollars that you send to Washington. And whether you send them to Doylestown, to our county seat, or to the nation's capital, you know, I strongly believe it's a principle for me that for every dollar you send, you deserve a dollar in return. And in a big organization, there is going to be some waste, and that's unfortunate, but it's our job to get after it and to make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure it's not happening. And so stay in place, cut the waste. What it would do is it would require the Office of Management and Budget to come back to the United States Congress within 6 months with a plan to reduce executive agency travel by 50%, across the board reduction of 50%, and use this opportunity to convert that travel to video conferencing, which is something, as David said, the private sector's been doing for years. And I did a teleconference, press conference on this bill about 2 weeks ago from Cisco in Washington. I was in Washington. The press was here in Bucks County. There was a Bucks County business that actually is involved in teleconferencing, talking about how this actually does work and you can save money. And the guy at Cisco told me, you know, a couple of years ago, we reduced our travel budgets by 50%, this guy in the private sector. And he said the interesting thing about it was you don't actually reduce the number of your client contacts because they were not wasting all that time and money traveling. They actually increased their contacts with their clients and their customers. So it actually was beneficial on a whole bunch of different levels, but for purposes of this bill, to save. Because the savings of this bill, one bill alone, reduction of 50% in government travel is $5 billion a year. And as the government budgets in sort of a 10-year look forward, that comes to $50 billion. And to put that in perspective, the sequestration that has caused a lot of concern and upset across the federal bureaucracies amounted to about $85 billion this year. Now, this is one bill over 10 years will save $50 billion. You start adding up these bills, you're talking about real money. And these may be small steps in the beginning, but they're steps to prove that, number one, we can do it, we're committed to it, and in the process, we're building trust across the aisles. I'm meeting with elected officials from other districts in other communities that don't necessarily look like Bucks County, but their constituents have the same principles and the same values. And then once we adopt these initial set of 9 bills, we can get to the bigger ones then. So, Bill, thanks for hosting us today. I guess we'll get to the questions.
And Bill, real quick, since I heard that you were a county commissioner and we're in Bucks County, and you actually try to balance your budget and pass them on a timely basis here, and look to the future with investments for this community college. We've got a new motto for Bucks County. We don't pass the buck in Bucks County.
Good. Sounds good. Am I mistaken? Are we going to show a short video? Or are we going to get right to Erin? We're going to get right to the questions. Okay, very good. Well, I want to thank you for submitting so many questions. We have a question from just about every person here, and we're obviously not going to be able to get to all of them. But the good news is many of them are redundant, so I'm going to do this topically. I'm going to circle the topics that I think were addressed and let the gentleman respond that way. And I want to reiterate that Congressman Fitzpatrick has indicated that he and his staff will respond to every question submitted, which is why we asked you for email addresses, phone numbers, and whatnot. But hopefully it's your lucky day and we'll get to yours. Incidentally, speaking of lucky days, the Jersey Powerball lottery is not yet finalized, so if you win please consider giving something back to your community, or specifically Bucks County Community College, okay? The first question, I'm going to take the liberty of asking it myself, because I'm very interested in the no pay, no budget, no pay. 27th Amendment, just for the benefit of the public, and I think you alluded to it, 27th Amendment to the Constitution says that a congressman's pay cannot be adjusted during his or her congressional term. So what I heard you say is that the proposal here would be that if the Congress does not adopt a budget in their term, the following term, they would suffer the financial penalty of doing so. Is that?
Actually, no. The way that it works is if they pass it this Congress, then effective in the next Congress, it will be effective for budgets and appropriations bills in the next Congress. So therefore, when people are running for office in 2014, they know what the situation is. They know that their pay could be at risk if they don't do their job. And the whole idea is to make sure that they do their job. By the way, California did this, and guess what? It worked.
Okay, and this is not a delay in pay. This is the final bill that...
This is you don't get paid until you accomplish it, and therefore, to the extent that you're late, but you do accomplish it, you lose the pay for the intervening period of time.
So it's not, that pay is not just delayed, it is gone.
G-O-N-E.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to address that. I mean, you know, to me, it was just basic common sense. No budget, no pay. And the other thing about these bills, they have names. Each of the bills, by the way, are small, short, readable, in plain English. Everybody can understand. It's not some big behemoth bill. But they've got names that actually you can understand what it is we're trying to do. No budget, no pay. To me, that was such common sense. I rushed out to co-sponsor that bill. I just thought it made eminent sense, because in your individual lives, and if you don't show up for work, and that happens on a sustained basis, eventually you're not going to get paid. And as David said, it's been a long time since members of Congress have actually adopted a budget. So I rushed off to support it, and we did run into a problem in this term because I wanted it adopted this year, and that amendment to the Constitution adopted some time ago, we sort of ran into that. And so when I alluded earlier that there was a watered-down version of no budget, no pay that had to be adopted, this year's iteration of that bill says that members of Congress, their pay will be escrowed. But unfortunately, at the end of the year, that would have to be released. But there would still be some pain in that. You could go 2 years without drawing a pay. But as David said, in the future, if we adopt it this year, next year, if somebody's not adopting an appropriation bill or a budget, there will be no pay. And not only will you not get paid, if you adopt the budget retroactively, you don't get paid retroactively. You don't get paid until that budget resolution is in place and you forfeited all previous pay.
Okay, our next question is from Michael Peck from Croydon. And again, the topic, we're going to start philosophical, and then we'll drill down to more specifics. Michael's position is, how does a bipartisan approach work when the questions are topics like Keynesian economics versus constitutionally limited government? How do you reconcile those two philosophical beliefs or positions?
Well, I'll start. First, this package is not about what the size of government ought to be, what the role of government ought to be, what the level of taxation ought to be, you know, how we should reform social insurance programs. It's not about that. It's about economy, efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, accountability. That's what it's about, all right? And when you're talking about an institution, the Congress, that is not only partisan, but in my view, the bigger issue is there's a huge ideological divide. Most of the Democrats are far left of center. Most of the Republicans are far right of center. There are very few districts in the Congress that are competitive. This is one. There's only 35 out of 435 seats in Congress, 35 to 45 that are competitive, all right? The rest of them are decided in the primaries. And so the point is that we need to do some things to try to get the institution to work more effectively, but in my personal opinion, we're also going to need some political reforms over time in order to revitalize our democracy and in order to have a republic that is more representative of and responsive to the public.
I just want to, I agree with what David said, and I would add to that a little bit. You know, I'm beginning my third term in the United States Congress, and what's unique about my 3 terms, David, most members will go down and serve a number of terms and then either retire or pass away or whatever. My terms were non-consecutive. I served in 2005 and 2006, was sent back here to practice my profession for 4 years, and then was asked to run again in 2010. And that gives you a unique perspective, to actually have been there, to leave, and to come back. Because, you know, in life and in serving in public office, you don't often get a second chance. And when I went back down in January 2011, one of the first guys I ran into was somebody who I'd served with as a freshman in 2005, a good guy, a moderate Democrat from the Midwest. And we talked about the intervening 4 years. And he described how difficult it had become during those 4 years. And what I noticed, most members would not notice if you serve all the way through those changes. When you're there and you come back, I noticed that the left had gone further left and the right had gone further right in the intervening 4 years, which made my participation and advocacy for this organization even more important. Now, you know, Michael's question has to do with philosophy and principles, and there are many different philosophies and perspectives in a body of 435 with individuals that represent congressional districts as diverse as this country is. Even just this 8th congressional district is very diverse. But in the organization No Labels, nobody checks their principles at the door. I co-sponsored the bill to cut travel by 50% with a proud Democrat from Georgia, John Barrow. I'm a very proud Republican from Pennsylvania. But what we do in No Labels is we try, you know, it wouldn't take very long sitting down talking about the big issues, figuring out where you disagree. And from there you can start the debate. We could debate all day and all month about the things we disagree on and ultimately achieve no solution or no progress. One of the slides earlier said, stop fighting, start fixing. That's the mantra. So instead of starting with what do we disagree on, we've decided as an organization to figure out those areas where we do agree. And we can all agree that government should not waste your tax dollars. You work hard for them. They belong to you. And you send them to Washington and expect me to spend them well. So each one of these bills is about just good common sense efficiency and effectiveness in government. Because as David said, you know, we can disagree about how big government should be, but we should all demand, have a right to expect that it run well. And that's what the organization's about.
Thank you. Let's stay with this No Labels thing for a minute in terms of what you alluded to about Democrats being more liberal perhaps than in the past and Republicans more conservative. I think we know, because of congressional districting and the way we do congressional districting, that perhaps 300 of the 435 districts in the country are skewed one way or the other very significantly. The 8th congressional district is atypical of that. We have a pretty balanced district, and Congressman Fitzpatrick has to exist in that arena. But how does a No Labels coalition trying to attract members deal with this idea of the way congressional districts are drawn? Is there a big picture solution or a path we should be pursuing as a country?
Well, first, let's understand that No Labels started in December of 2010. So it's fairly new, and it's evolving. And No Budget, No Pay was the first time that it advocated a specific legislative proposal. And the problem solvers are brand new. The problem solvers are just a few months old, and now they have 9 legislative proposals. And so you have to walk before you run, and we'll see where we go from here. I will tell you this, that members of Congress, and I'm sure that Mike is concerned with the fact that Congress as an institution is currently rated in single digits. In fact, it's rated lower than cockroaches. It's hard to imagine, but it's true. And so therefore, they're feeling the pressure whether they're a Democrat, a Republican, independent, they're feeling the pressure to get something done, okay? What the problem solvers are doing is they're saying, okay, let's figure out where we can actually agree on some things and try to actually get some things done pending the leadership of both parties being able to take a more constructive role in some of the bigger issues, whether it's immigration reform, whether it's a fiscal, grand bargain or whatever else. I do believe that over time that we're going to need to do redistricting reform. We're going to need to move to integrated and open primaries. We're going to need campaign finance reform. And I think we're going to need to think about term limits. Now, your congressman has self-imposed a term limit. He doesn't want to basically be a career politician, and I commend him for that, because I think that's one of the problems we have in this country. And so whether or not No Labels will champion the political reforms, there are a variety of organizations that are moving up on that, and I'm involved in some of those other organizations, if you will, because we clearly are going to need them to deal with people who aren't as enlightened as Congressman Fitzpatrick and know that you're not supposed to, serve until you drop.
That's, congressional boundaries, the whole redistricting process is done on a state-by-state basis. And so Pennsylvania, the way Pennsylvania does it may be different than some other states. So to a certain extent, it's a federal system of government. You need to respect the rights of states to make those decisions. I believe I need to be a better, more effective advocate on that issue. And I'm not sure whether No Labels will ultimately embrace that issue. There are so many issues down there. We're trying to start with those areas where there's clear agreement. And by the way, a lot of the members of No Labels, members of Congress, are also former members of state legislatures. I'm not. I was a local guy, not a state legislator. But I will tell you this, that when I mentioned earlier that that the left was getting further right, and the left was getting further left, and the right was getting further right, that is being driven by the redistricting process, and it's being driven by a desire on the part of members of Congress who want to preserve their tenure in Congress, so they end up with safer seats that will be less expensive to keep and more of a challenge to sort of take. That's what's happening there. As David said, there were, 35, maybe out of 435 truly competitive seats. This is one. We went through the redistricting process in Pennsylvania just a year and a half ago. And the Republicans control the state house and the state senate in Pennsylvania. And I'll tell you, as your representative, that I was approached as part of the map drawing process saying, hey, Mike, we can make an easier seat for you, less competitive for you. And this is what we would have to do. We'd have to divide Bucks County in half, taking everything south of Levittown, Bristol, Bensalem, Tullytown Falls, Morrisville, and just move that into the 13th district into Northeast Philadelphia, and you will then have a safer seat. And I told the folks that I didn't want to see that happen. I know this is a competitive district. It makes it difficult and challenging to represent. I think actually that makes me a better representative to have a more challenging district. It makes me more balanced because I need to listen and respect and value everybody's opinion. But as a lifelong resident of Bucks County, when I was bragging on Bucks County earlier, there are very few counties in the country that are known by the county name. Some not for good reasons. Cook County, Orange County, California, Dade County, Florida. Bucks County, Pennsylvania. When I travel, leave this area, if you're from Montgomery County, you may say I'm from Fort Washington or King of Prussia or Ambler. When you're from Bucks County, you say you're from Bucks County, and I have a lot of pride in that this is the Bucks County seat. And so I said, you're not dividing Bucks County as part of a redistricting process. And I understand future members, and myself and future members, are going to have a more difficult time. But whether it's reforming the way districts are made, and perhaps I need to go out to Harrisburg and visit with them and give them that perspective, I think we should be unafraid of competitive congressional districts. It's going to challenge. You're going to end up with more challenging races, better crop of candidates, more attention paid to you, which is a good thing, I believe, but a more ultimately, in the end, in the United States Congress, a more balanced Congress that can actually tackle and solve the issues that we're talking about today.
If I can very quickly say what California has done that is relevant here, because it is a federalist issue. The states have the ability to deal with this. California did two things. Number one, they took redistricting out of the hands of the legislature. They had an independent process, and the objective of it was to maximize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act, rather than to minimize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act. Secondly, they eliminated party primaries. They eliminated Democratic primaries and Republican primaries, and they said the Democrats can endorse a candidate, the Republicans can endorse a candidate, they can raise money for the candidates, they can provide ground troops, but there's one integrated and open primary, and everybody votes, and the top two vote getters run off for the general election. Let me tell you what, that has shaken up the political system big time. And it's something that I think ultimately we're going to have to think about, and that can be done at the state level. That can be done at the state level if they want.
Thank you. Getting back to the cockroaches for a minute because it intrigues me. You're right. I mean, I don't know. I hadn't heard the analogy between the approval rating of congressmen and cockroaches, but there's an adage that says Americans are frustrated by their Congress, but they love their congressmen. Right. And we elect, as you said, our incumbents in overwhelming numbers. And I don't think there's anything that, if I can editorialize for a moment, that can change the system in Washington that has people scratching their heads. Well, if we're so frustrated with Congress, why does it get reelected? Then redistricting, then nonpartisan commissions to drawing lines. So I just wanted to plant that seed with the public, and I'll move on. I'm finished for the day. Okay. The next question is from Steve. I can't read his last name. He lives in Newtown. And Steve, the topic is shutting down government. It seems every time we approach the point where we need to raise the debt limit, there's the debate about whether or not we're going to shut down government and just not fund the increased debt limit. Can you comment on that with regard to the No Labels Coalition?
Well, first, I'm speaking for myself here, okay? We are the only major nation that has a debt ceiling limit. And it's dumb. And let me tell you why it's dumb. Because basically, when Congress passes tax bills, when Congress passes social insurance bills, when Congress does funding, it's just a matter of fact that you're going to end up having to raise the debt ceiling limit if you haven't balanced the budget. It's just a matter of fact, okay? And therefore, my personal view is that what we ought to be doing is we ought to bring back tough statutory budget controls, and the sequester is part of it, but that's not an intelligent way to do it, okay? It's across the board, one size fits all. So we need to have a more intelligent approach there. We need to be able to have a credit card limit. You know, this country doesn't have a credit card limit. We need to have a limit as to how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on. That number can't be manipulated. When government talks about a balanced budget, in most cases, it's a bad joke because of the way that they calculate balanced budgets. They're not really balanced, you know. And so therefore, we ought to replace the debt ceiling with tougher statutory budget controls and a credit card limit that would be meaningful. You don't want to shut down government, because if you shut down government, you're going to end up creating huge disruption. It's not, you know, you will save a little bit of money in the short term, but it will end up costing you money in other ways over time. And so, therefore, I think what we have to do is to figure out how there can be some type of an agreement in a way that will better control spending and without shutting down government. And I will also tell you that we're going to have more revenues. But the way you're going to get more revenues is through comprehensive tax reform and moving away from the abomination of a tax system that we have right now. I'm a CPA. I prepare my own tax return, not because I'm a masochist, because I just want to be able to show it can be done. And my view is if you don't have a tax system where 90% of individuals can prepare their own tax return, then it is an unacceptable tax system, and we need to move it.
As a follow-up, as an accountant, as a Hall of Fame accountant, can you give us some insight as to just what the dialogue about shutting down government last time that resulted in a bond, in a lower bond rating, what did that cost us as a nation? Is there a way to calculate that, or at least shed some light on it?
Yeah. Well, it was the debt ceiling debate in August of 2011, and ultimately it was averted. And that was the deal that resulted in creating the sequester, that created the so-called super committee, which I call the super failure committee, because they did nothing basically meaningful and totally failed. And, you know, of course, the sequester was supposed to be the tactical nuclear weapon that would never go off, but it went off because we haven't been able to do anything. What happened was, while we averted a shutdown, the resulting demonstration of how dysfunctional Washington is caused S&P, Standard & Poor's, to downgrade our debt for the first time in history. Now, it didn't have a significant adverse effect on our interest rates, and you want to know why? Because we are self-dealing in our own debt. The Federal Reserve is buying $85 billion a month of U.S. government securities and government-backed securities, which artificially holds down interest rates in order to try to be able to stimulate the economy, in order to try to help the housing market. You can do that for a while. You can't do it forever. And so it's critically important that the Congress work together to come up with a fiscal grand bargain that deals with spending and comprehensive tax reform, so the Federal Reserve can not have to do what it's doing now, which is in effect self-dealing in our own debt, and which provides a false sense of security as to where we are and where we're headed.
Thank you.
Well, I want to add to that and just say that, you know, I understand that people are frustrated. I understand why constituents would want to begin to engage in the discussion of a government shutdown. I don't like to engage in that discussion or discuss it because it's an acknowledgement, I think, that the government and the system really is broken. And we have some big problems. We have mega challenges. But I don't want to acknowledge that we're out of ideas. I don't want to ever give the impression that I'm ready to stop talking to folks on the other side of the aisle, because as soon as you stop talking, then you start fighting again and you stop fixing, and that's when the problems begin. And so in my experience, whether in my private practice as a public official on the county level and now in Washington, my perspective is you're always sitting down with folks that you disagree with. I try not to sit too much with people I agree with. I know that we agree with each other. Sit with those that you disagree with. Try to learn from their perspective what's going on. And we saw it, as David was talking about, in August of 2011. But then we saw it again, the so-called fiscal cliff, on December 31 of last year. And that was pretty intense. I was there in the nation's capital between Christmas and New Year's. And I was in my office with my 12-year-old son when the clock struck 12 on New Year's Eve. Tommy and I sitting there looking at each other and waiting for the Senate to pass something. And, you know, there was a lot of, talk radio hosts in this area, and I get on the radio and they'd say, Mike, when you get to the fiscal cliff and you look over, you're not going to give in, right? You're not going to let taxes rise. And folks were asking me to draw a line in the sand. And I would go right to the line with them. I'd say, we can do this and we can do that and we can negotiate. But at the end, as we were getting close to the end of the year, I said, if you're asking, am I going to jump over? Am I going to go cliff diving without a helmet? Am I going to jump over the cliff without knowing where that goes? I'm not going to do that to our economy or our country. And I was one of the few in this region that wouldn't go there. And ultimately, we now know how that played out. See, I think if you're sitting at the table and you're negotiating, I didn't want taxes to go up on anybody. That's my perspective. But as David correctly points out, we do need new revenue in this country. We need to figure out how to do it. And that's one way. The better way, frankly, is grow the economy, get people back to work, and more people paying payroll taxes. That's what we should be talking about. But we had a situation we had to solve. And shutting the government down, anything other than selectively you know, maybe you can take a particular agency and say, that's not critical, we can shut that down. But this idea of across the board, we stop talking, we're going to shut it down, I think that's destructive to the process in Washington, bad for the economy, and as David pointed out, resulted in an actual credit downgrade. And the long-term effect of a credit downgrade is our credit becomes more expensive for the taxpayers. It costs more to borrow when you get a credit downgrade. And so ultimately, it's bad on many different levels.
And Bill, by the way, I think there's a real possibility to get some of the provisions in this Make Government Work agenda tacked on to a debt ceiling increase. Because I don't think that they're going to be able to agree on the so-called fiscal grand bargain. I'd like for them to. I don't think they're going to, for a variety of reasons. They need to do something. And there's a lot of great ideas on here, and the debt ceiling is a must-pass bill. So let's put this on a train that we know is going to leave the station.
Thank you. Our next topic, I'll say, is from Mark Riff from Langhorne, and the topic regards defunding Obamacare. There's been a lot of talk about that. What are the implications of that? How do you see this from a no-labels perspective? The United States Congress passed the health care system, and now we're talking about defunding it, which would, in effect, render it inoperative.
Well, first, No Labels has not taken a position on this issue. I don't expect that it will take a position on this issue. I think the bottom line is that no matter what happens in the House with regard to this funding, it's going nowhere in the Senate. And as was mentioned before, if you don't pass the House and you don't pass the Senate, then it doesn't get to the president's desk, and and nothing happens. All right. And so no matter what you think about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare or whatever you want to deal with it, I do think that we have to recognize a couple of things. One, government has way overpromised on health care. Way overpromised. It's got tens of trillions of dollars of unfunded promises for health care that it's going to have to restructure its promises and make sure that it can keep the promises that it makes. Okay. Secondly, I'm very concerned about whether or not the Affordable Care Act is going to be able to be implemented on time, even if it is funded. Because one of the worst things the federal government does is integrated information systems. And you're going to have the IRS and HHS and Immigration and Naturalization, a number of departments and agencies working together to create a database that says who's eligible to sign up and for what subsidy. And while the delay of the employer mandate's already been announced, that was one of the easiest things to implement. And this other stuff is very, very complicated. So my view is that I think, at a minimum, one of the things that needs to be seriously considered is delay implementation, so and then decide what needs to be done going forward.
Just a clarification. When we talk about defunding Obamacare, if Congress does nothing, I'm not sure what has to happen procedurally for Obamacare to be implemented. I'm not talking about from the standpoint of can they do it in a bureaucratic way. I mean in terms of the funding sources and whatnot. If Congress does nothing, what happens? And
in theory, and the congressman may want to speak here, I mean, in theory, Congress has the power of the purse. It's ultimately going to have to do something with regard to appropriations bills. In my view, it's likely to do some kind of continuing resolution, and we're likely to continue to have the sequester unless and until you can agree on something that's more intelligent, if you will, that also has to involve mandatory spending reductions. But the fact is, when you move a spending bill, whether it's a continuing resolution or not, you can tack things onto it. And you can say, for example, for the appropriation that deals with the Internal Revenue Service, you shall not spend any of these funds to do this. You can say for the Department of Health and Human Services, you shall not spend any of your appropriation to do that. So that's what they mean, in my view, when they say defunding. But I come back to say that ultimately you got to pass the House, you got to pass the Senate, and you got to get a presidential signature unless you have a 2/3 override vote for a veto. And so, you know, figure it out.
So it would take a proactive measure to say you shall not use these funds for this purpose, and that will not pass Congress. It won't pass both houses. It won't pass the Senate, and if it did, it wouldn't get the president's
And I'm not
signature,
saying whether it should or it shouldn't.
Right.
I'm just telling you that
asking
that's
what's
the
happening.
reality.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Congressman? I want to address this issue a little bit. As you just heard, the government has way overpromised what it can afford to deliver in health care. And while no labels may not have taken a position with respect to the Affordable Care Act, I have. And the individuals here in this community, they know what my position is. Health care is very personal to all of us. It's personal to me because of my experiences. And I actually announced my run for Congress in front of a hospital, mainly because of not just, when I talked earlier about the budget, it's the problems in Washington is not just how much they spend, it's the process, it's how they spend it. And the same could be said for the way the health care, the Affordable Care Act was passed, not just what's in the bill, some of which I agree with, most of which I disagree with, but it was the procedure that it was adopted, the way that it was passed, without any real sort of deference to the other side of the aisle, any of the ideas that they may have had. And there were a lot of promises that were made. And, you know, this is so important an issue, health care, and so personal. We can't afford to get this wrong, both from a fiscal point of view and from a personal delivery of health care services. And so the American people in 2008 and 2009 and 2010 desperately needed and deserved health care reform, and we got a bill in place. A bill that, in my view, missed the mark because it did not deal with cost containment, which is the major issue for healthcare finance. So it missed the chance to do that. I'm a guy that believes you can't just go to Washington and be against things. You have to be for something. You have to lay out for the people what are your solutions and what are your ideas. And so I introduced a bill last year with Congressman Joe Heck, who represents Nevada. He is a Philadelphia-trained physician, and it is our replacement bill, because I think if you're going to be for repeal, and I voted for repeal, you also have to lay out what your replacement will be. Now, the replacement bill would keep all the consumer protections located in the in the beginning of the Affordable Care Act, the provisions that would provide for coverage of pre-existing conditions in health plans, non-discrimination in health plans, the ability for young Americans to be able to, if they're, you know, my children graduating from high school or college into a very difficult job market who can't find employment or employment with health benefits attached to it. The idea that if my young single children living at home could stay on my health policy a little longer, and they would pay for that, we would pay for that, that they should be able to do that. Those are the kinds of consumer protections that I thought we should have been for, you know, that should have been out there and should have been adopted. But the problem is the more intrusive aspects of the health care bill, which has objections not just on the Republican side of the aisle, but also the Democrat side of the aisle. We need to start rolling out some of those votes. And I think that that's really important. I just want to give you a couple of sort of facts, because there are a lot of taxes in the bill. We were told what the cost would be. Originally, the cost was going to be $900 billion over I think 10 years. I thought at the time that the federal government had overpromised on what it could deliver and underestimated the cost. So they said, we're going to cover all Americans and the cost will be $900 billion. I'm glad, okay. So here we have $900 billion, the 10-year cost projection as the president promised. You can see where it has gone, and this is Congressional Budget Office nonpartisan data. The real cost is $2.6 trillion. So it's much more expensive than originally advertised. But the deepest cut, you know, for those who really care about providing health care, accessible, affordable health care for all Americans, is in how many people at the end of the day are actually going to receive service and coverage and access through the Affordable Care Act. I'm looking at a CBO report that came out last month it's an estimate of the uninsured the uninsured number of Americans under the Affordable Care Act as Obama's health care plan, the President Obama's health care plan is implemented, if it's implemented over 10 years to 2013, 2023, as was projected, that at the end of the day, there would be, you never get less than 30 million uninsured Americans. And so the promise to the American people, the idea that we're going to radically change the way we deliver health care, the way it's paid, the way physicians are reimbursed, if the idea and the promise was that Americans would be covered, the CBO is telling us with this plan, we're not going to achieve that. It's going to be more expensive and fewer people will be covered. And so that's why I feel it's critically important at the moment now that we have, where a lot of Americans are saying, reform that bill. This is the Washington Post from Thursday. I picked it up. I was down in D.C. this week. This is an advertisement on the back page of the front section, and it lists all of the labor unions that had advocated for the passage of the bill. And they were strong proponents. Labor's International, National Treasury Employees Union, that's the IRS. You saw the acting director recently said he wouldn't want to go into a state exchange. International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, United Union of Roofers. And they're quotes, and these are quotes from letters that I've received in my office from the labor unions. I'll just give you one quote from the roofers. They're calling for a repeal or complete reform of the Affordable Care Act to protect our employers, our industry, and our most important asset, our members and their families. And so there may be a moment right now, the question had to do with defunding. And I voted for repeal and I voted to defund. And as David Walker points out, that bill isn't going anywhere in the Senate. I wish we could somehow get to a conference and come to an agreement. But we're at a moment right now where some of the strongest and earliest proponents of the Affordable Care Act are calling for reform, and now's the time to do it. Not shut down the government and say we just don't want any of it. Figure out what it is we can live with, reform the rest, get rid of the stuff we can't afford, and move on to what I would hope would be more free market reforms to the healthcare system, which is what made this healthcare system great in the first place.
We have just a few minutes. We'll try to get through a couple of them quickly. One is the Farm Bill. Subsidies for farms, food stamps attached. If you guys could comment on that and its implications for the budget. And
we still have a few farms left in Bucks County. Most of them, there's a couple actually in lower Bucks County, Steyer's Orchard, place Guzikowski down in Falls Township. But we still have quite a few farms in central and upper Bucks County. Not as many as some of the districts out in the middle of the country. But the Farm Bill is important, not just because we still have farms in Bucks County, but food security is important. And we need to make sure that in times of drought and national disaster, that those supply lines are not disrupted. And so what we tried to do, was the question about the Farm Bill or the Farm Bill and food stamps?
Well, it was a pretty long dissertation.
Okay.
So I think we just deal with it topically.
Yeah, I mean, in this area, a lot of folks would ask me also about the food stamp aspect, the SNAP program of the Farm Bill. I made it pretty clear that I was supporting the Farm Bill. I wanted to see us eliminate direct payments to farmers. And you've probably seen some reports recently about direct payments going to formerly alive farmers. No longer with us. That happens, and that needs to end. One way to do it is reform that just eliminate direct payments. But we do need a crop insurance program that farmers are paying into, because at time of disaster, and I remember we had a bad drought in Bucks County in, I'm going to say 1999. There was a massive drought in Bucks County, disrupting the farmers' ability to continue to farm. Well, if you don't have a crop insurance program, that could put those farmers out of business. So for Bucks County, we'd lose those farms, they'd go to development, and we would never have the locally grown produce. But more importantly, if you don't have a crop insurance program, what's probably going to happen, the federal government always does this, they come in a time of disaster and they bail people out. We saw it in Hurricane Sandy, we saw it in Hurricane Irene. They're going to bail out the farmers in time of drought because it's that important to our country. So I think it's important we have a crop insurance program, even if it's supported by the federal government, because you want the farmers paying into it, at least paying something, because they will be subsidized during time of drought. Now, the problem came in the Farm Bill when there were reforms to the food stamp program. And I got to tell you that there are now 46 million Americans on food stamps, and that number is going up drastically. And we have to figure out how to get people to work. We have to figure out how to create jobs in the private economy so that families are not driven or being driven by the government through their marketing the food stamp program to programs that in the long term we can't afford. So I was for reforms to the SNAP program, and I voted for several reforms. You know, the idea that some states tie food stamps directly to LIHEAP. And
Sorry, to what?
To LIHEAP, which is the low-income heating assistance. They say if you qualify for LIHEAP, you automatically qualify for food stamps. And what some states were doing, because they were able to do that and the federal government permitted it, some states figured if we give Mrs. Fitzpatrick $1 worth of LIHEAP, she automatically qualifies for food stamps. And so they were sort of gaming the system. We need to reform the system. And I voted for and supported a number of reforms, but I didn't vote for all of them. And at the end of the day, the Republicans wanted more reforms. The Democrats, this is generally speaking, wanted no reforms. And so the Dems basically voted against the Farm Bill. Not enough Republicans voted for it, and it failed, even though I supported it. It's an example of the left and the right wouldn't support a good reform for the American people. So we came back. We ultimately passed a Farm Bill. This is going to be solved in conference between the Democrats, Republicans, the House, and the Senate, in a conference committee. And it's going to be a compromise bill, but it's going to be an important bill because we need a farm bill and farm security and food security going forward.
Bottom line, eliminate direct payments, have real insurance reform, and we need to rationalize the social safety net to help people who are truly in need, but to prevent abuse.
Thank you. Two more? Can we do two more? Just topically, the question of federal funding of local infrastructure projects.
It's actually in the Constitution. One of the original obligations of the federal government is to build post roads. So the idea that you would have an interstate system which is supported by the federal government is important for the connection of communities and states to each other, for the movement of goods and services throughout the country. I think that President Eisenhower had it right almost 60 years ago when he started the interstate system. And you know, incidentally, it's not just good for commerce, which is good for the private sector. It puts a lot of people to work. Last week, I was at a groundbreaking for a $1.4 billion project. David, you have it right here in this community, in this township, here in Bristol Township. You have the intersection of the major north-south expressway, Interstate 95, in the country, and the major east-west thoroughfare in Pennsylvania connects Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Turnpike. They actually cross here in Bristol Township, but there's no interchange. They cross the two, and you try to get off. But that's going to be that is going to be fixed. But in order to fix that, it was a federal law that requires it. The federal government has to be able to fund it. And I think that we're going to have to be creative going forward in finding ways to work with state and local governments in the private sector to come up with the financing to build those infrastructure projects. Our roads are crumbling, and that is an obligation. You can see it in the Constitution that we have to the American people. And a good incidental benefit is going to put a lot of people to work.
The bottom line is, when you look at the macro numbers, the federal government is spending way too much on consumption and not enough on investment. Critical infrastructure is something that we need to spend more on. It needs to be properly designed, needs to be effectively implemented. If the federal government's going to be involved, there's got to be an interstate commerce aspect to it. It's not just local things. Obviously, what you're talking about, that is the case, if you will. Let me give you a few numbers that would shock people. 100 years ago, the federal government was 2% of the economy. Last year, it was 23. Stated differently, it's 11.5 times bigger than it was 100 years ago. Secondly, 100 years ago, Congress controlled 97% of spending every year through the appropriations process. Last year, it controlled about a third. Of the third includes all of the express and enumerated responsibilities envisioned by the nation's founders under the Constitution, all investments in our future, and all investments in young people. So stated differently, it's 11.5 times bigger, it's lost control of the budget, it's spending more and more on consumption, less and less on investment, less and less on young people. That is not a prescription for future prosperity. It's time to wake up, engage in a real debate. And on the health care, we need universal health care that's appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. But that's not what the ACA is. Yeah. We could get into all.
This will be our last question.
Takes too much time.
Would you comment on the fiscal implications of our immigration situation right now?
Well, on immigration, there's absolutely no question that we need comprehensive immigration reform. And comprehensive immigration
Excuse me, we're here to listen to the presenter.
My personal opinion, reasonable people can and will differ, okay? Yes, you need to strengthen border security, but you also have to look at our immigration policy as it relates to economic growth and our competitive posture. And our immigration policy needs to be focused much more on skills and knowledge, because that's what it takes in order for us to compete in an interconnected and interdependent global marketplace, okay? In addition, we need to understand the difference between a pathway to citizenship and a pathway to legal status. They are very, very different things, okay? Citizenship means you get all the rights, including voting rights. We need to recognize that there are certain aspects of our economy, including the farm, agricultural community, where we ought to have temporary visas for work permits for people to come across and be able to meet that need. So, we're going to need to do some things, but we need to do some intelligent things and on an integrated basis. That's my view.
I think we do need to fix the system. Part of the reason the system appears to be broken is that existing laws have not been enforced, and that would be by Republican administrations and Democrat administrations. When the Constitution says Congress passes the law and the executive branch enforces it. And so there are a number of different reasons why this needs to be addressed. The question going forward is whether it's going to be addressed in the way the Senate addressed it, which is a pretty big bill, which they refer to as comprehensive immigration reform, or the approach that the House would prefer, and the approach that I think makes more sense, because this issue is so important. To just sort of gloss over any particular piece of it would be wrong. And so the House approach would be to deal with all of those issues in order. And the order that it prefers, we being a nation, we need to recognize our history and tradition as a country, and what made this country great, which is legal immigration, is that we're a country of immigrants, but we also are a nation of laws. So, the first aspect would be strong border security, not just border security at the southern border, also interior enforcement. Because the fact is, there are probably 40% or more of those who are here without proper documentation, illegals who are here in our country, who came here legally, perhaps as students at the community college, perhaps as visitors or on specialized work visas. And maybe as a visitor with a 90-day visa, they just decided at day 91 they weren't going home. And so that was a lack of enforcement on the part of the country. And so it's the federal government that's responsible for the condition that we're in right now. Then the second piece would be taking it in order, fixing the broken system of legal immigration. And David's referring to, we need to make sure as we're looking to allocate visas that we're doing so in a way that is respectful of the job condition and situation in our country and those areas where we're trying to grow our economy, in high-tech, high-skilled workers and certain low-skilled workers. We need both. And we need to be more about providing opportunity for individuals to come here in a way that's legal in accordance with our laws, but also fills needs of this country going forward. And then the third aspect, there are, hard to estimate because we're not really sure what the number is, let's say 11 million illegals who are here today. We need to determine how to deal with that in a respectful and humane and moral way. I gave a quote to, I know the Courier-Times is here. It's a quote I gave to the Courier about 10 days ago, and we'll maybe just end with the comment I gave to the reporter. People, because the question had to do with how it affects our economy and costs. People want to get our economy moving again, and immigration reform is part of the formula to putting us back on the right track. The easiest way to tell that America is still strong is that more people are trying to get in than trying to get out. That is not the case with most countries in the world. However, before we can determine the most compassionate and fair course of action for immigration reform, we need to know who is here already. We must strengthen our borders to keep Americans safe while creating a baseline to find out who's here. Once we know who's here, we can then have a responsible and informed process to support families and to get our economy moving again. Ultimately, the American dream should be available to everybody who plays by the rules. But it is clear that the rules aren't working anymore, and they need to be fixed.
Thank you, Congressman. We've gone over our time. I want to thank the members of the public and congratulate the members of the public for your civic mindedness, for your exercising your responsibility to be informed citizens, and your presence here today and the demeanor in which you carried yourselves during this exchange. I certainly want to thank David for coming down from Connecticut to share his wealth of knowledge, and found it very informative and enlightening, and very appreciative of Congressman Fitzpatrick for allowing Bucks County Community College to host this event. He's no stranger here. We've had congressional debates here. I hope we can do this again sometime when the students are in session, because we need to educate our future leaders as well.